Welcome to the wild, mysterious heart of America, Yellowstone National Park, a place of profound beauty, a caldera of simmering, primordial power. But what if that beauty hides a darker, more unsettling secret? Welcome, dwellers of the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. Today, we're diving into 5 genuinely unsettling supernatural encounters reported by the very people sworn to protect this land, the Yellowstone Park Rangers. These aren't just campfire stories. They are the never-before-told, disturbing encounters of men and women hardened by years in the wild, who have come face to face with things no training could prepare them for. Are you ready to hear what truly lurks in Yellowstone's shadows? Story 1. The figure on the firehole as a ranger. You learn to trust your instincts. The little prickle on the back of your neck that tells you a grizzly is nearby. The sudden silence in the woods that means a predator is on the move. But the feeling I got that night, patrolling the boardwalks of the upper geyser basin, wasn't an instinct I had a name for. It was a cold, alien dread, a sense of being watched by something that didn't belong in the natural order of things. It was late October, the tourist season long over, the park settling into its deep winter silence. A freak cold snap had descended, and the steam from the geysers was a thick, ghostly fog that clung to the ground, swallowing the moonlight. My job was simple, a final sweep for any stragglers, any foolish tourists who had ignored the closure warning. The air was thick with the familiar, sulphurous breath of the earth, a smell I usually found comforting, but tonight it felt menacing. I was near the Firehole River, the boardwalk slick with frozen mist, when I first saw it. A figure, standing motionless in the center of the boardwalk, about 100 yards ahead of me. It was silhouetted against the thick, swirling steam from a nearby geyser, a tall, dark shape in a world of ghostly white. My first thought was a lost tourist. My second, a poacher, Federal Hunje. I called out, my voice sounding small and thin in the vast, steamy silence. The park is closed. I need you to come towards the sound of my voice. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there. I unholstered my sidearm, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. I began to walk towards it, my heavy boots thumping a slow, steady rhythm on the wooden planks. The fog was so thick, it was like walking through a dream. The figure would disappear into the swirling steam, then reappear, always in the same spot. As I got closer, about 50 yards away, I started to make out details. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 7 feet, and it was thin, its limbs long and angular, like a creature made of sticks and shadows. It wasn't wearing a coat despite the sub-zero temperature. It seemed utterly unaffected by the biting cold. And it wasn't standing on the boardwalk. It was hovering, a few inches above it, its non-existent feet shrouded in the thick, rolling steam. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not a person. My training, my experience, my every rational thought was screaming at me to turn and run. But my duty, my foolish, human sense of duty, kept me moving forward. I raised my high-powered flashlight, and centered the beam on the figure. The light hit it, and for a second, it was just a man. A tall, gaunt man in old-fashioned, tattered clothes. His face pale and sorrowful. He looked like one of those old, sepia-toned photographs of the first explorers of the park. A man out of time. He looked lost, confused. He raised a hand, as if to shield his eyes from my light. I felt a pang of sympathy. A ghost, I thought. A harmless, tragic spirit trapped in this place. But then, the light of my flashlight began to flicker, and with each flicker, the man changed. Flicker, a tall, gaunt man. Flicker, a creature of stick and shadow, its limbs elongating, its form becoming sharp, insectile. Flicker, the man again. But his face was twisted in a silent, agonized scream. Flicker, the creature, but its head was now a smooth, featureless ovoid, and its skin was the color of obsidian. Flicker, flicker, flicker. The image strobed, a horrifying, stop-motion animation of a thing that was not one entity, but 100, all trapped in the same space, all fighting for control of the same form. It was a glitch in reality, a tear in the fabric of the world, and it was wearing the skin of a man, of a monster, of a nightmare. I stumbled back, my mind unable to process the sheer, impossible wrongness of what I was seeing. The figure let out a sound. It wasn't a roar or a scream. It was the sound of my radio, a perfect, crystal clear imitation of my own voice calling for help. Ranger down. I repeat, Ranger down. Need immediate assistance at the Firehole River. It was a lure, a trap. Then it began to move towards me. It didn't walk. It glided, a smooth, silent, and terrifyingly fast movement. It flowed over the boardwalk, a river of pure, glitching darkness. I turned and I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until the slick, frozen boardwalk gave way to the solid, frozen earth of the trail. I didn't look back. I just ran, the sound of my own voice, calling for help from a stolen radio that wasn't there, echoing in the foggy, primordial landscape behind me. I made it back to my truck, my mind a shattered wreck. I reported a false sighting of a poacher. I couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. Yellowstone is a caldera, a place where the skin of the earth is thin, where the veil between worlds is stretched taut, and sometimes, in the deep, cold, lonely nights, something from the other side pushes through. Something that is not one thing, but many. Something that wears the faces of ghosts and the shapes of monsters. And it is a hungry, patient predator. And it has learned to use our own voices, our own calls for help as its hunting cry. Story 2. The Whispering Pines. They don't tell you in the Ranger Academy how to handle a ghost. They teach you first aid, law enforcement, bear safety. But there is no chapter in the manual for what to do when the woods start talking to you, and when a missing person case turns into a haunting. I was stationed in a less trafficked section of Yellowstone, near the Beckler River, a beautiful but notoriously swampy and confusing area. A young woman, a solo hiker named Amelia Hayes, had been reported missing for 3 days. Her car was at the trailhead. She had signed the logbook, and then she had simply vanished. I was part of the search team. For 2 days, we performed a grid search. Our lines of brightly vested volunteers, a stark, futile intrusion into the vast, indifferent wilderness. We found nothing, not a footprint, not a broken twig, not a single dropped piece of gear. On the 3rd day, my search sector took me into a dense, ancient grove of lodgepole pines, a place the old maps called the Whispering Pines. It was a fitting name. The wind, funneled through the tightly packed trees, created a constant, low, sibilant whisper. As I pushed my way through the dense undergrowth, I began to hear it, a voice, a woman's voice, faint and melodic, woven into the sound of the wind. I stopped, holding my breath, straining to listen. It was singing, a soft, sad, wordless lullaby. My first thought was her, Amelia. Maybe she was injured, delirious, singing to keep her spirits up. I unholstered my radio. Dispatch, this is Ranger Cobb. I have a possible auditory signal, a female voice, singing, I'm moving to investigate. I followed the sound deeper into the grove. The whispering of the pines grew louder, and the singing became clearer. It was beautiful, haunting, and it seemed to be coming from all directions at once. The feeling of being watched was immense. The forest itself felt alive, aware. My compass began to spin erratically. I was losing my bearings, but I was getting closer to the voice. I had to be. I stumbled into a small, sun-dappled clearing. The singing was loud here, echoing in the small space. But the clearing was empty. There was no one there. And then the singing stopped. It was replaced by a whisper, a clear, distinct voice that was not carried on the wind, but seemed to be spoken directly into my ear. So cold, it whispered. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. I was completely, utterly alone. But I wasn't. The whisper came again from my other side. So lost. This wasn't Amelia. This was something else. Something intelligent, playful, and deeply, deeply malicious. It was using her voice, or the idea of her voice, to lure me in, to get me lost, to add me to its collection. The Whispering Pines were not named for the wind. They were named for the chorus of lost souls that were trapped here. I had to get out, but every direction looked the same. The sun was blotted out by the thick canopy. My compass was useless. The whispers were all around me now, a cacophony of fear and sorrow. Help me. I can't find the trail. He's so close. Dozens of voices, all speaking at once. The ghosts of 100 vanished hikers. And woven through them all was the clear, melodic, and now terrifyingly sad voice of Amelia Hayes. She wasn't just missing. She had joined the choir. I did the only thing I could think of. I fired a single shot from my sidearm into the air. The roar of the gunshot was a violent, profane intrusion into the whispering silence. For a moment, the whispers stopped. The forest held its breath. And in that moment of silence, I could hear it, the faint, distant sound of the search party's whistles. A real sound. A sound of my world. I ran towards it, not daring to look back. The whispers started again, angry now, a furious, hissing chorus of rage. They were trying to pull me back, to confuse me, to keep me. But I had a direction now. I focused on the faint, shrill sound of the whistles, and I ran until I burst out of the grove and into the arms of my search team leader. I never told them what I heard. I just said I'd gotten turned round, that the acoustics in the grove were strange. The search for Amelia Hayes was eventually called off. She was never found, but I know where she is. She's in the Whispering Pine. Her voice has become a part of the forest's sad, hungry song. I put in for a transfer the next day. I couldn't work in a place where the trees had voices, where the very air was a tapestry of grief. Some mysteries in Yellowstone aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be a warning to stay on the path and to never, ever follow a beautiful, sad song into the deep, dark woods. Because sometimes it's not a cry for help. It's an invitation to join the choir. Story 3. The Guest in Room 217. The Old Faithful Inn is more than just a hotel. It's a living, breathing piece of history. A cathedral of logs and stone that has been watching the geyser erupt for over a century. I was a young, seasonal ranger, and one of my less glamorous duties was the nightly security patrol of the inn after the last of the guests had retired. It was a dream job for a history buff like me, walking the silent, creaking corridors, the only sound the groaning of the old timbers. But the inn has its secrets, and one night I became a part of one of them. It was a cold, clear night in late September. I was on the second floor of the old house, the original part of the inn, my footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. As I passed room 217, I felt a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature. It was a localized, tangible cold, a pocket of absolute zero in the otherwise warm hallway. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I paused, listening. From inside the room, I heard a sound, the soft, rhythmic creak of a rocking chair. My blood ran cold. The room was supposed to be empty. The entire wing was closed for the season. I radioed my supervisor, my voice a strained whisper. "Dispatch, this is Cobb. I have a possible unauthorized presence in room 217. Old house." His voice crackled back, calm and weary. "Copy that, Cobb. It's probably just the wind. But check it out. Protocol is protocol." My heart was pounding as I used my master key to unlock the door. I pushed it open slowly. The room was dark, but in the faint moonlight filtering through the window, I could see it. An antique wicker rocking chair in the center of the room, rocking back and forth, slowly, deliberately, on its own. The room was freezing, my breath pluming in the air. I shined my flashlight on the chair. It was empty, but as the beam hit it, the rocking slowly came to a stop. I did a full sweep of the room. The closet was empty. The bathroom was empty. The window was locked from the inside. There was no one there. I was about to back out of the room my mind reeling when I saw it. On the crisp, white, and perfectly made bed, there was an indentation, a single, perfect, head-sized indentation on the pillow, as if someone had just been lying there, watching the door. I backed out of the room, closed and locked the door, and practically ran back to the ranger station. My supervisor, a grizzled old-timer named Frank, just nodded slowly as I told my frantic, breathless story. He wasn't surprised. He then told me the history of room 217. In the 1920s, a wealthy woman, a bride on her honeymoon, had been found in that room. She had taken her own life for reasons no one ever knew. She was found in the rocking chair, a bottle of laudanum on the table beside her. Ever since, guests and staff had reported strange occurrences in that room. The sound of weeping, the rocking chair moving on its own, the feeling of a sad, watchful presence. He told me to just log it as an unusual occurrence and to forget about it. I tried to, but the next night, as I did my patrol, I couldn't bring myself to go down that hallway. I stood at the far end, looking towards the dark, silent door of room 217, and I saw her. For just a split second, a woman, a bride, in a beautiful, old-fashioned, white lace gown, was standing in the hallway, looking at me, her face a mask of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. She was translucent, a shimmering, spectral image, and then she was gone. I thought that was the end of it. A sad, harmless ghost story. A tragic spirit forever bound to the place of her death. But the next week, a new dimension of the haunting was revealed. A set of strange, old-fashioned, mother-of-pearl hair combs went missing from the hotel's historical display case. The case was locked, with no signs of forced entry. The security cameras for that hallway had mysteriously malfunctioned for the exact 10-minute window when the theft would have occurred. A week after that, a guest in the room next to 217 reported that a beautiful antique lace handkerchief had been left on her pillow, a handkerchief she had never seen before. The hotel's historian identified it. It had belonged to the bride. The ghost wasn't just a sad, passive echo. She was an active, intelligent, and mischievous presence. She was a kleptomaniac, a collector of beautiful things, stealing from the present to furnish her lonely, spectral past. And she was a gift giver, leaving pieces of her own history for the living. I am telling this story now because of what happened last year. The hotel decided to renovate the old house wing. They brought in a team of historical consultants and construction workers. Room 217 was the first room they entered. When they pulled up the old original floorboards beneath where the rocking chair had always stood, they found it, a small, hidden compartment. And inside, nestled in a bed of rotting silk, was a collection of stolen objects spanning 100 years. A man's gold pocket watch from the 1930s, a child's silver rattle from the 1950s, a set of car keys from the 1980s, and, nestled amongst them, the missing mother-of-pearl hair combs. It was her nest, her collection of treasures stolen from the living to comfort her in the long, lonely, eternal night of her death. But that wasn't the most chilling discovery. At the very bottom of the compartment, they found a small, leather-bound diary. It was the bride's. The final entry, written in a shaky, looping script, was dated the day before she died. It read, "He is not the man I thought he was. He is a monster. He says he will never let me leave. He says this room will be my cage, and he will be my keeper forever." She had not taken her own life. She had been murdered, and the true ghost of room 217 was not the sad, lonely bride. It was the monster she had married, and she wasn't just haunting the room. She was trying to warn us. The stolen objects, the gifts, they weren't random. They were clues. They were a cry for help, a 100-year-long message from a desperate, terrified soul, a warning about the other, darker, more patient spirit that still resides in that beautiful, historic, and utterly haunted in Story 4. The Sound of the Stampede. The indigenous tribes that first called this land home knew its secrets. They knew that Yellowstone was not just a place of natural wonder, but a place of immense spiritual power, a place where the veil between our world and the spirit world was thin. As a ranger of native descent myself, I've always tried to listen to those old stories, to respect the ancient warnings. But nothing could have prepared me for the night the land itself seemed to scream a warning at me. I was on a solo backcountry patrol in the Lamar Valley, a vast, open expanse known for its huge herds of bison and its profound, soul-stirring silence. It was late autumn, the air crisp and cold, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. I had made camp near a small, winding creek, and I was settling in for the night. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, a strange feeling came over me, a heavy, oppressive pressure in the air, a feeling of being watched, not by an animal, but by the land itself. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was expectant. I'm not a man given to flights of fancy, but I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to move. An ancient, instinctual voice in my gut was screaming at me to pack my things and get to higher ground. I looked around. The valley was calm. The weather was clear. There was no logical reason for this sudden, overwhelming sense of impending doom. But the feeling was so strong, so insistent, that I decided to trust it. I quickly broke down my camp, packed my gear, and began to climb the steep ridge that bordered the valley. Every step I took, the feeling of being watched intensified. I felt like a mouse under the gaze of a hawk. I didn't dare look back. I just focused on climbing, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached the top of the ridge just as the last light of the sun was dying, and I looked back down into the valley I had just left. It was bathed in the pale, silvery light of the rising moon. It was completely, utterly empty. I felt a wave of foolishness wash over me. I had abandoned a perfect campsite out of a vague, paranoid feeling. I was about to head back down when the sound began. It was a low, distant rumbling, a sound I knew well, a bison stampede. But there were no bison in the valley. I had seen that with my own eyes. The rumbling grew louder, closer, a thunderous, ground-shaking roar. And then I saw them, a herd of bison, pouring into the valley from a pass to the east. But they were wrong. They were translucent, shimmering, ghostly figures, their forms made of moonlight and memory. A phantom herd, hundreds of them, a river of spectral beasts, their ghostly hooves not touching the ground, their silent, phantom roars echoing in my mind. They thundered through the valley, a silent, ghostly reenactment of a long-forgotten stampede. They passed directly through the spot where my camp had been, where I would have been had I not listened to that strange, primal warning. They were not just ghosts. They were a force of nature, a memory of the land so powerful it could still kill. I stood on that ridge, paralyzed, and I watched as the phantom herd thundered past and vanished into a past to the west. And then, in the silence that followed, I saw him, standing in the center of the valley where the herd had just passed, was a figure. He was an old, indigenous man, his long, gray hair braided with eagle feathers, his face a mask of ancient, sorrowful wisdom. He was a ghost, just like the bison, a shimmering, translucent guardian. He looked up at me on the ridge, and he slowly, deliberately, nodded his head once, a gesture of acknowledgement, of thanks. And then he, too, faded into the cold, clear Wyoming night. I know what happened. The land itself had warned me. The spirit of that ancient guardian, a man who had perhaps died in that very stampede centuries ago, had reached out, had planted that seed of fear in my gut, and had pushed me to safety. I had been in the path of a memory, a scar on the land that replayed its violent, deadly history on certain nights. I was not being haunted. I was being protected. I never told this story in my official reports. How could I? But it changed me. It deepened my respect for this place, for the ancient, unseen forces that still hold dominion here. Yellowstone is more than just a park. It is a living, breathing entity with a memory, a spirit, and a power that we can only begin to comprehend. And sometimes, if you are quiet enough, if you are respectful enough, if you are lucky enough to be of the land itself, it will speak to you, it will warn you, and it will show you that the most terrifying stampede is the one that leaves no tracks, no trace, no evidence at all, except for a single, terrified, and profoundly grateful survivor, standing alone on a silent ridge. Story 5. The thing that wears the geysers. Every ranger in Yellowstone knows the geyser basins are dangerous. It's not just the boiling water or the unstable ground. There's an older, stranger danger, a feeling that you are a trespasser in a place that does not belong to the world of men. The steam, the hissing vents, the bubbling mud pots, it feels like the workshop of a mad god. I was a geothermal scientist working on contract with the Park Service, and I spent my days in that workshop, taking readings, monitoring the geysers, trying to understand the pulse of the caldera. I thought I was studying geology, I didn't realize I was studying the anatomy of a monster. My area of focus was a remote, unnamed geyser basin, far from the tourist boardwalks. It was a chaotic, beautiful, and utterly terrifying landscape of hissing fumaroles and jewel-toned hot springs. I had set up a series of seismic and thermal sensors throughout the basin, all feeding back to a laptop in my research tent, which was pitched on a safe, stable patch of ground a quarter-mile away. The data I was getting was bizarre. The geysers in this basin didn't follow the predictable patterns of Old Faithful. They were erratic, chaotic. A geyser would erupt with a furious 100-foot plume of boiling water, then go completely dormant for weeks. A quiet, bubbling spring would suddenly, violently explode. The seismic readings were a mess, showing a pattern of movement beneath the basin that was not the slow, grinding work of tectonics, but a series of sharp, rhythmic, and almost biological pulses. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a trick of the steam. I was looking at the live feed from a thermal camera I had placed near the center of the basin. In the swirling, superheated mist, I saw a shape. It was huge, amorphous, and it was moving. It wasn't an animal that had wandered into the basin. The thermal camera showed its body temperature was well over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a creature made of the steam itself, a swirling vortex of heat and water, and something else, something with a vague, shifting, and deeply unsettling form. It coalesced for a moment, and I could almost make out a head, a torso, two long, reaching arms, before it dissolved back into the undifferentiated cloud of steam. I was a scientist. I did not believe in fire elementals or steam demons. I recalibrated the camera, checked the software, convinced it was a technical glitch, a lens flare, a software artifact. But I saw it again the next night, and this time it was interacting with its environment. It drifted over to a small, dormant geyser, and it seemed to pit inhale. The steam from the surrounding vents was drawn into its form, and the creature seemed to grow larger, more solid. Then it bent over the geyser, and it exhaled. A massive, superheated plume of steam and boiling water shot up from the ground. A new, violent eruption, born from the breath of this impossible, geothermal ghost. I was not studying a series of unrelated geysers. I was studying a single, massive, subterranean organism. The geysers were its limbs, its mouths, its sensory organs. And the thing I was seeing on the camera, the steam wraith, was its consciousness, its way of physically manifesting in our world. It was a creature not of flesh and blood, but of heat and pressure, and the raw, untamed power of the earth. I knew I was in profound, unimaginable danger. I was a flea, studying the skin of a sleeping dragon, and I was beginning to think the dragon was waking up. I decided to pull my senses and leave at first light. That night, I was huddled in my tent, watching the feeds, a sense of deep, primal terror washing over me. The steam wraith was active again, but it wasn't just drifting. It was moving with a purpose. It was moving from sensor to sensor, from camera to camera. I watched on my laptop screen as it approached my primary thermal camera. It coalesced out of the steam, a towering, shimmering figure of pure heat. It reached out a long, steamy tendril and gently, almost curiously, touched the camera lens. My screen flared white with an overload of thermal energy, and then the feed went dead. It was dismantling my work. It was blinding my eyes. One by one, the feeds from my other cameras went dark, each one preceded by a flash of intense heat. It was hunting me. It was using the network of sensors I had built to track its own body to track me, its creator. I was left with a single dark screen, the silence of my own tent, and the knowledge that a creature of pure, superheated rage was now aware of me, and was methodically erasing my presence from its home. I scrambled out of my tent, abandoning everything, and I ran. I ran through the dark, treacherous landscape, the ground around me hissing and steaming, a constant, threatening reminder of the creature whose skin I was running on. I didn't dare use a flashlight, afraid it would act as a beacon. I ran by starlight, my only guide. I was halfway back to the main trail when I heard it. A new geyser erupting behind me, in a place where no geyser had been before. A furious 100-foot plume of boiling water and steam, cutting off my path of retreat. Then another to my left, and another to my right. It wasn't just hunting me. It was hurting me. It was using its own body, the very landscape itself, to build a cage around me, a prison of steam and boiling water. I was trapped. I was cornered. I could feel the heat, hear the roar of the geysers all around me. I was about to be cooked alive, a victim of the most bizarre and most terrifying predator on the planet. I collapsed to the ground, defeated, and then I remembered one last, crucial piece of data. The geysers were chaotic, unpredictable. They erupted with a furious but short-lived power. They were sprints, not marathons. I waited, bit the steam wraith. The creature, the consciousness, was a thing of pure, explosive energy. It was immensely powerful, but it couldn't sustain it. I lay on the cold, hard ground, the steam washing over me, and I waited for it to run out of breath. The eruptions lasted for what felt like an eternity, and then, one by one, they began to die down. The roaring faded to a hiss, the steam thinned. The cage was dissolving. I didn't wait for it to catch its breath. I ran until the ground was solid and cold, until the air was clean and free of the smell of sulfur. I ran until I was back in a world that made sense. I know what lives in the deep, unmapped basins of Yellowstone. It is the park itself. It is the spirit of the caldera, a living, breathing, and deeply territorial god of steam and stone. And I am the only person on Earth who has seen its face and lived to tell the tale. And I will carry the memory of that sight, of that impossible, beautiful, and utterly terrifying creature with me for the rest of my days.